subscribe to Dostcast.
Yo, what is up, my friends? Welcome to another episode of Dostcast. मेरा नाम है Vinamre Kasana. Today's guest is Abhijit Chavda. I hope I'm getting his last name right. He is an expert on geopolitics, history. By profession, he's a theoretical physicist. In his domain, he's pretty much learned all the things he has on his own. He's a voracious researcher. आज वाली conversation में, we sat down, we discussed the Aryan invasion theory. We discussed why Raja Ram Mohan Roy is not the reformer he seems, what is lacking in Indian scientific research, and what we can do to rescue our history from our imperial past. So the episode with Abhijit Chavda begins in 3, 2, 1.
No, you need to get over that phase, right?
Yeah.
You need to become who you really are.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things when senior writers talk about finding your voice.
Writing and it's
Right.
similar, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. Your expression, your creativity, who you really are.
It becomes a discovery process more than kind of like you start with who you already are. It never happens like, this is who I am, let me bring it out. It's always like, I find who I am. And I'm just wondering for you also, I mean, you've had a life before you went on the internet. It's different, say, from 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds who start their identity on the internet and they have like two lives and they intermesh. You were broadcaster self and you were private life, right? I guess the first good way to start is why did you even decide to get on the internet and start sharing your ideas as someone who is, doing theoretical physics?
So I've always been somebody who has worn lots of different hats. I've not only always been a theoretical physicist. I've also been a technologist. I've been a programmer. I've been into IT for 10 years plus.
Right.
And I've always been this bookworm. When I was a kid, I used to read a lot of books all the time. The only thing that saved me from becoming a total nerd is that I was good at sports in some way. So I was always that sort of person. And I had a lot of ideas. So that's the thing that's kind of the background that I have. Now, why did I come on the internet? I'm not quite sure. I thought of making something creative. I'm a creative person.
Yeah.
So I thought of creating something and I made this one video, a short documentary kind of thing about Genghis Khan.
Yes.
And I put it up and it went viral. It's got like more than 3 million views now. So even after that, I did not do anything. I did not post anything for a year. And then I think it is Ranveer Allahabadiya who called me on his podcast. And I went there and that also had a very good reaction, a very good response from the audience. So I thought, let me try and do something. I mean, people seem to want to listen to me. I did not know that people would want to hear me, So I discovered that it's the case. So then I thought, let me try and create some kind of new format on YouTube.
So it started off after he put you on the podcast, people responded to you. They reached out to you saying, we want more. And then you decided, let's set up a YouTube channel.
No, I had a YouTube channel. I had uploaded a video there, which went viral.
Yes.
A video about Genghis Khan, the Mongol conqueror.
I watched it. Yes.
Yes, and I think that's how Ranveer got to hear about me.
Yeah.
That this guy has made this interesting video, so let me come and let me call him on my podcast. So I had a YouTube channel first. I put a video there which went viral. Then I went on Ranveer's show. And I saw the comments that I got on his channel. I saw the number of views that it was getting. So that's how I thought, let me start something on my own.
You have this show called Ask Abhijit.
Yeah.
And you respond to pretty much all comments. Like you use a comment as a starting point and then you extrapolate from there. Lots of interesting things came up, but I was watching one of your videos and a good point that I thought I would bring up is the parallels between Indra and Zeus. Because I have been studying through my interest in Vedic astrology, I've been studying a lot of stories of Indra. And I think Indra is one of the most interesting gods, primarily because he's an insecure god. He's a king god, but he's also always insecure about his throne. He's full of lust, right? He has frequent falls from disgrace, then he does penance and he's back up again. And the parallel to Zeus is just the obvious. He's cruel, he's malevolent, but he's also a king god. I've always been very fascinated with this comparative religion idea where you can sort of compare gods. Like in Hinduism, you've got Mangal, and Greek gods, you've got the god Ares, right? I see this in your analysis as well, is that you always bring up different fields to arrive at a point. You don't ever say something linearly, right? So it's a very comprehensive approach. Where does this interest stem from? Were you reading a lot of Greek mythology and Indian mythology growing up together?
So my interest in history began with this book series by Will Durant. It's called what is it called? It's a whole 12 or 13 book series. The story of history or something like that.
The story, yes, I've heard of it. I can't recall the name as well. Huh?
Yeah, so that's what I was reading when I was in school. I thought it was more interesting than fiction. And I was not interested in Indian history. Indian history was depressing, sad, full of invasions and defeats and all that. So I used to read about Egyptian history, Greek history, Roman history, even Chinese history and so on. So I learned about the Greek mythology, the various gods that they have, the entire pantheon of gods. I saw that it's pretty much the same as the Roman pantheon of gods. So Zeus and Jupiter are the same god. Zeus, Pater, Jupiter, same thing. And then later on, much later on, in my late 20s, early 30s, I realized that there is a much older god called Dios Pita, Dios Pitru, who became Zeus, Pater, who became Jupiter, who became Thor. It's the same god.
Wow.
It's
so
not
even
comparison.
Norse
it's the same.
mythology is derived from that.
So if you look at Indra, so Indra has acquired over time the attributes of Dios Pitra, who was his father.
Yeah.
Now Indra, like we know, is the greatest of all the gods. He's an insecure god, like you say. He's very relatable, right? And he has these shortcomings. He has this heroic nature. He has two main weapons. The same weapon actually, the Vajra. The Vajra is a hammer. It's also a thunderbolt.
Oh.
And Zeus is a hammer god. He's a thunderbolt.
Yes.
Jupiter is a hammer god. He's a thunder god. Thor is a hammer god. He's a thunder god. Moreover, Indra defeats this enormous sea monster called Vritra, who has encircled the ocean and he has deprived the world of the waters of the ocean.
Right.
Zeus defeats this great sea monster called Typhon, who has done the same thing. Jupiter does the same thing. And Thor defeats the great sea monster Jormungandr, who has encircled the oceans of the waters of the ocean. It's the same story. It's not different stories. It's not like you're comparing X with Y with Z.
Right.
It's the same story. And all you have to ask yourself is, which is the oldest tradition? It's clearly the Vedic tradition. So that's where it all stems from. And that is all about the Aryan invasion myth and the out of India theory.
Right.
And that's the whole controversy, right? So if you do this comparative analysis, you will understand where it all begins. Where does the story begin? That's what
But is there any evidence, any peer-reviewed sources for proving this? Because one of the issues that I've been facing when I talk to Indian historians or people who are just interested in it or are polymaths, is the problem with our history is that so much of it is oral.
Yeah.
It isn't like we have, like the West has, where you have like proper manuscripts from even Plato and Aristotle still like they still exist today. Our culture has an oral problem that is quite fragmentary. So who gets to decide what is true and not? And like, how do you do that?
So first of all, let's talk about this oral problem. So it's true that much of our history is oral. Now, why is it so? It's not always been that way. So what we are told by the West is that you guys don't have a sense of history. You guys have never bothered to write your history, blah, 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 blah. Now, it is known for a fact that we had universities across the length and the breadth of this country, from the West in Takshashila all the way to the East in Nalanda and in Sumatra, Java, etc. and so on and so forth. It is known that when the University of Nalanda was destroyed by Bakhtiyar Khilji, he burned the library. It took months to burn. What was burning, if not written records of our history and of our science and whatnot? And it's not just Nalanda that burned. It was Takshashila which was destroyed. It was Telhara, Vikramashila, Shardapit, Udantapuri, and so on and so forth. University after university was destroyed, and all the libraries were burned. And that's how we lost the written records of our history. It's not like we are an ahistorical people. We're not.
Right.
So what happened is that whatever history was left to us, whatever our ancestors could remember, they were forced to pass it down orally. And when the European invaders reached India, they decreed that your oral histories are myths, and we are going to proceed to write your history for you. And that's where we are today. That's where we are today. And that's what's taught to us in our schools, colleges, universities, in our textbooks. That's what the mainstream academia is all about. It's about aping the West. They have not attempted to do an a priori investigation of our history from our own perspective. It's always about the foreign perspective. So that's where we are stuck today. Now, when it comes to peer-reviewed publications, etc., about our history, about our so-called mythology and so forth, it's all Western. Whatever exists is Western. And unfortunately, there is this very strong Eurocentric bias in that. Whether it is about literature, whether it's linguistics, whether it is genetics, it's all Eurocentric. For instance, let's see this issue of the Aryan invasion theory versus the out of India theory. It's a controversy. And the entire body of literary, of academic evidence that we have, knowledge that we have, all the corpus of academic evidence that we have, it's all Eurocentric, it's all Western. So let's say you have multiple fields that intersect in this. For instance, you have literature, you have linguistics, you have genetics. Now, it is clear that linguistics and genetics to some extent seem to go hand in hand. Not always, but to some extent. So you can do a comparative study of that. But who has done all these studies? It's all the Western experts who've done it. For instance, when you see genetic studies, you will see that all the data points are from Pakistan or from Indian expatriates in the West. There's no genetic study done from the length and the breadth of India until very recently. Now we find that there are certain geneticists in India like Dr. Neeraj Rai, etc. and so on.
Who you had on your podcast. Yeah.
Yes. So they are beginning to do this work. And the research that's going to come out of that is going to transform our understanding of who we truly are.
Yeah. I had Kushal here yesterday and I was discussing the same thing with him. When I was in the US, a lot of my friends had started to get to Ancestry.com and 23andMe, two websites that allow you to see your genome, to see if you're 39% Welsh, 48%, Afrikaans, whatever. And then you can see what propensity you have to depression, alcoholism, what traits you have, all of that. But I was seeing whenever it comes to the Indian genome, well, there was no Indian genome. And what that means is if I go and do a report from them, it just shows 100% South Asian.
Yeah.
So, and that's the problem. And I've always wondered, what is our own genetic makeup? And you're saying that there are studies being done. How long do you think it will take before we can arrive at something like, people based in for example, the Haryana region are prone to this specific? When do you think we'll arrive at that?
I think we need to give it a decade or so. So what we know is that India has the highest genetic diversity of any population outside of Africa.
Really?
And yes, absolutely. Africa has the greatest genetic diversity in the whole world, the continent of Africa. The genetic populations there. Outside of Africa, it is India that has the highest genetic diversity in the entire world. Second highest outside of Africa.
Right.
But beyond the diversity, what we find is that there is a great deal of genetic uniformity within the Indian populations. So whether you are from southern India or northern India, East India or West India, except for the northeast part, if you're within this region, despite the incredible diversity, there is an overall big picture uniformity of genetics. So a South Indian person, let's say from Tamil Nadu, let's say Muthaiya Muralidharan, he will have much more in common with Imran Khan than with Vladimir Putin. You get it? So the Indian population, the populations of the Indian subcontinent, from Afghanistan all the way to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, they are genetically extremely diverse and yet quite uniform. So that is what I have seen in study after study after study in the past 20 years, studies that have been published in the past 20 years. Because genetic science came into its own in the past 2 decades.
Right.
So that's what we see for a fact. And we see that there is very little introgression from other places. Because
what is introgression?
Input from outside.
Okay.
Genetic input from outside. So what we find is that when this out of Africa migration happened, about 70 or so thousand years before today,
right.
The people, the Homo sapiens, our ancestors, the ancestors of all of non-African humanity, they ventured out of Africa from the Djibouti region, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, and they proceeded eastwards because there was a very thin region of greenery there.
They followed the coast, right?
They followed the coastline because it was reasonably fertile. There was some greenery there because
it's always easier to go through the coast anyway.
Not just that, because there was greenery there. If you see Balochistan today, if you see Arabia today, the Arabian Peninsula, it's all desert.
Right.
But 70,000 years ago, there was a thin strip of greenery.
70,000 years ago. But I know for a fact that even 300 or 400 years ago, the parts of Syria and other places were called the Fertile Crescent because there was a lot of greenery there. That's gone out now.
So that is a few thousand years before today.
Yeah. Okay.
So climate change is a thing. It's always been there. So you see the evidence of that in this. So these people, they ventured out of Africa. They traveled along the coastline and then they reached the Indian subcontinent. And that was the original out of Africa founders zone because it was a lush tropical region, very fertile, plenty of sustenance for as many humans as you needed. So that was the first out of Africa founder zone. It is there that humanity first settled down, stopped migrating, settled down, and the oldest non-African genetic lineages, whether they are matrilineal lineages or patrilineal lineages, are of Indian origin. They originated in the Indian subcontinent. Haplogroup F in the male lineages and haplogroups N and M in the matrilineal lineages. These are the oldest non-African lineages. They are of Indian origin.
For the sake of the listeners, I've also read the word haplogroup. I don't know what that means. Could you help me understand that? Yeah.
So a haplogroup, it's a fancy term to represent a lineage that starts with one individual.
Right.
A genetic lineage. In Hindi, we call it Vansh. Vansh, samjhe?
Surya Vansh, Chandra Vansh, right.
Exactly. So Surya Vansh starts with Surya. Chandra Vansh starts with Chandra. So these haplogroups are nothing but Vanshas, genetic lineages, which all start with a single individual in whom a specific mutation first happened.
Interesting.
Okay. So a patrilineal haplogroup, it is passed on from father to son through the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is only passed on from father to son.
Correct.
Okay. So if a mutation happens in a person, let's call him F, about 70,000 years ago or 60,000 years ago, and that person reproduces, that genetic mutation will be passed on from father to son and so on and so forth down the line. And then you will have further mutations that happen down the line. So those are daughter mutations.
Right.
So F is the original patrilineal haplogroup. Similarly, you have something called mitochondrial DNA, which is passed on from mother to children.
Right.
Mother to children.
That's the storehouse of our energy.
The mitochondria. So they contain some DNA code within them, the mitochondria within our cells. So that is passed on from mothers to children. So I also have mitochondrial DNA, but I cannot pass it on to my children.
Right.
There's only mothers who pass it on. So that's why it's a matrilineal DNA code. Right.
Are there any differences between matrilineal lineages and patrilineal lineages in the way they look or the way they behave or their skin color, anything like that?
No, it's all amalgamation. It's all mixture. You can't really tell. I mean, you have to look at the genetic code to see the exact bits and pieces of the specific mutations.
Right.
So that's how it is. So I have a whole bunch of patrilineal mutations that have been passed on to me over the millennia. And similarly, I have a whole bunch of matrilineal mutations also that have been passed on to me through my matrilineal lineages, thousands of them, over the millennia. So I don't know which is which. It doesn't matter. But if a geneticist were to take a sample of my blood or hair or whatever, they'd be able to tell me what my matrilineal haplogroup is and what my patrilineal haplogroup is, and so on and so forth. So that's how you do this the science. And what we find is that the original out of Africa lineages, the oldest lineages, are of Indian origin. They originated in the Indian subcontinent. And what it tells us is that humanity first settled down in India, took a breather, and from India, from the Indian subcontinent, it expanded in a star formation. East, west, everywhere. Bang, 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 bang. And then you had the peopling of Eurasia, essentially. And what we found is that we had other lineages that were already present. The Denisovans, for instance.
Yes, I've heard of them.
The Denisovans and
Neanderthals.
the Neanderthals in Western Eurasia, right? So what we find is that most non-African humans have between 2 to 6% Neanderthal DNA, which means their ancestors intermingled and interbred with Neanderthals and had children that were half Neanderthal, half Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
And that those lineages are present within us. But when I last spoke to Dr. Neeraj Rai, he told me something I did not know about, that Indians don't have Neanderthal lineages, which is very interesting because Europeans have it.
Well, it's responsible for being brawny, right? That's how you define it.
It's not. Yeah, the Neanderthals were larger, heavy set and all that, but we received some very specific mutations from them, which give us certain advantages. Now, the thing is this. Europeans are known to have this Neanderthal DNA, but Indians don't have it. If there was an Aryan invasion of India with European genetics coming into India, why is there no Neanderthal DNA in India?
That's a good question.
Isn't it? So, all of these data points, they add up and they form a big picture that tells us that there was no Aryan invasion or even a migration or even a trickle of drops. Almost nothing. So that's just one data point that I can offer you. There are so many more. So it's not like I saw one or two things and I decided there was no Aryan invasion.
Right.
I was a firm believer in the Aryan invasion theory.
You believed till 2016. And
till 2016, yes. And then I, for some reason, decided to look at the original, to look at the research papers themselves.
Yeah.
What we do usually is we read books.
Right.
We read books written by reputed authors, and then we base our conclusions and our knowledge based on those books. So I had been reading all this and I thought, there is an Aryan invasion. What's the big deal? Aisa hota hai to hota hai. Isme kya hai? Then I said, let me take a look at the actual research papers. And when I see the research papers, the entire picture changes. It tells you that these people have been lying. They have been misrepresenting the facts. This Eurocentric bias all over again.
You read Tony Joseph's early Indians. Manu Joseph's friend, sorry Manu. Tony Joseph's early Indians, and
I haven't read it fully. I have the book. But it's sufficiently.
You read the sources, and one of the things you mentioned on your website is that a lot of the claims in the book are based on a pre-published paper.
Preprint, yeah.
Right? It was preprint.
Yes.
My problem is this. So who decides? Like, I have nothing against Tony, but I'm just saying, who decides as a journalist that I'm going to publish a book on genetics and like make things easier for a lot of people? How were you able to sort of pinpoint and find the holes in his argument? Was it through do you have a better understanding of how to read research papers? Like, how were you able to piece it together?
The thing is, I'm a scientist, I'm a physicist, and because of that, I discovered that I am able to understand genetics papers.
Right.
Because of the scientific training, the physics papers are the toughest to understand. And if you're trained in doing that, you can basically understand any other scientific research paper. I cannot do research in genetics, but I can certainly understand what the genetics research papers are telling me, right? Because I have some background in biology and all that as well. So what I discovered is that there is this preprint by Narasimhan and other scientists in the Reich Research Laboratory in the US, David Reich's research group. So they came up with this preprint in which, I don't remember the exact details right now, it's been a while, but there are certain significant circular arguments and there is this stand-in population. So the thing is this, they have discovered some population in India's periphery. And they have assigned it the name of the Indus periphery population.
Is it the Siddi people in Gujrat?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not. Siddhis are very recent. We're talking about thousands of years before today.
Okay.
So they have, they created this stand-in group. They also created this artificial ANI, ASI, artificial North Indian, artificial South Indian categorization, which is again, they're trying to create the Aryan Dravidian divide.
Right.
And if you ask Dr. Neeraj Rai, he will tell you that this is the worst distortion of data you can ever find. I mean, you can see it on my podcast, my conversation with him. So the thing is this, I don't remember the exact details. It's been a few years, but the research paper is full of holes. It's not even a peer-reviewed research paper. At the time, it was used to form the basis of the book, right? So that's what you find. And there were all these miscategorization. On what basis do you create these two categories, Aryan and Dravidian, ancestral North Indian, ancestral South Indian? If you do a proper detailed genetic analysis of the Indian population as a whole, you will find there are very little differences, very, very minor differences.
Right.
For instance, there is this haplogroup, patrilineal haplogroup called R1A1A. Okay, it is given the tag of the Aryan gene because it is the most successful extended family in the known world. It has its population. It numbers more than 1 billion in population today. So it's a group of males who live in Eurasia, who all originated, whose ancestor was one single Indian man who lived about between 18 and 26,000 years ago.
Right.
Okay. So this is the so-called Aryan genetic signature. But you find that this so-called Aryan genetic signature is found in greater concentrations in certain tribal groups in South India and in certain South Indian populations. You will find it in greater concentration than in populations in Northern India. And yet they are creating this categorization. So what you find, I'll tell you a big picture perspective, is that there's this lot of cherry picking that's going on.
Right.
They find certain data points that are suitable and they ignore other data points. And that's how the entire theory has been constructed. Which
takes me to another part of the conversation is talking about lineages. I have noticed, I was reading, there's this historian called Tanuja Kothiyal, right? And she's written a book on mobility in India. I can't remember the name, mobility specifically in the Thar region in Rajasthan. And she talks about how right now, if we can loosely say the group known as Kshatriyas, which is Gujars, Jats, Rajputs, Ahirs, and sometimes Yadavs, it's all over the place. It's a pretty loose term, right, for warriors. She says in those times, in kind of medieval Rajasthan, you had almost everyone sticking claim to the highest lineage possible, right? Saying that we are Rajputs, or we are Gujars, and we as a result are kings. To the point that even Muslims were doing it in that area, and Christians were also doing it, right? And one of your videos talked about the origin of the jars, right? At this point, what she says is it's really hard to know who's who, because a lot of it is just retrospectively saying we come from this king and pledging allegiance to him, and as a result using that supposed lineage to elevate their social status in India.
So that's something you see across the world. People always want to climb the social hierarchy. There's no place without a hierarchy.
Right.
You can't have a functioning society without a hierarchy. So if you look at the
tell that to people who preach equality all the time.
I know equality is a myth. I mean, when you do the Olympics, what are you doing? Are you celebrating equality, or are you
No, you're celebrating competition, winners. You're celebrating winners.
You're celebrating inequality. You're celebrating excellence, and excellence comes at the expense of mediocrity.
Yeah.
Right. So equality is a myth. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
The thing is this: you can't have a functioning society, a functioning organization, a functioning corporation, a functioning military, or functioning anything which involves cooperation without a hierarchy.
Right.
Right. So that's how every society has always been. If you look at the letters of Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador to the Mauryan court, he tells us that he recorded that India had a society divided into 7 classes. It was 7 classes. It was not the 4
Jati Varna system.
Jati Varna is very complex. But the 4 Varnas is what the British categorized us as.
Right.
And that's what they set in stone, and that's what we are still following in our official documents. But Megasthenes spoke about 7 major categories or classes of people, depending on what they were doing, occupations and all that. So anywhere in the world, whether it's in the West, in England, in medieval England, for instance, you had the peasants, you had the knights, you had the nobility, you had the aristocracy, you had the kings.
Right.
And people always wanted to rise to a higher level. So they would offer services to their lords.
Or get their sons or daughters married into alliances with others. Yeah.
Yes, and so on. So they would hope to eventually, over time, climb up the social ladder and become a member of the nobility, the aristocracy, maybe even a king someday, who knows. So that's how it's always been in society. And I'm sure that's the way it was in India. So there is this controversy going on social media about Rajputs and Gujars and Kshatriyas and God knows what. Doesn't matter. The thing is that we are a 10,000-year-old civilization, at least. All of us has some royal lineages. All of us has, if you look at how lineages proliferate, you go back 500 years, you have more than 1,000 ancestors.
True.
If you go back 1,000 years, you got about 4,000 or so ancestors. You can do the math.
Yeah.
So it's statistically impossible you have no royalty in your blood.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
And those who overplay their royal lineage also would have to realize that there are enough peasants as well in the same domain, right?
You may have one bloodline that comes from royalty, but you have 1,000 other bloodlines that come from the plebs.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter. We are all the same actually at the end of the day. We all have the same lineages. We're all related to each other. We're all cousins in some form or the other. You go back far enough in time. You start the clock 1,000 years ago, you will have about 10,000 or 100,000 cousins.
Yeah.
You start the clock 2,000 years ago, you'll have a few million cousins, all related to each other. So that's how it is. And we are a very closely homogenized population.
I think our hubris is that we wear clothes. If all of us were naked, I think we would really see each other like we see animals.
Maybe
like
we
a bunch
would.
of deer. Not that I'm preaching nudism for it's a big country, and I think it'd be weird. One of the videos you talked about how Ashoka was a tyrant as opposed to someone who's considered a messenger of peace. And I remember as a kid, जैसे Panchatantra होती थी, you also had some other books that would extol some eminent personalities from India. And there was this one book that talked about how Ashoka basically, killed a bunch of people, ruled territory, and then realized the follies of his ways, right? Had like a Seneca moment or like a Marcus Aurelius moment for a brief while. And then this book ended with saying, and then Ashoka's message was carried on by Mahatma Gandhi. That was what the book was.
Good God.
So this was a story. And I grew up idolizing Ashoka, and we've got the Shah Rukh Khan movie as well, and then Mahatma Gandhi. But you seem to present a different picture. I was wondering if you can extrapolate on what that is.
So what is now known is, so what we've been taught for decades is that Ashoka was this great Mauryan emperor, grandson, I believe, of Chandragupta Maurya. And obviously he was a Hindu.
Right.
And he was a very very aggressive expansionist emperor.
Right.
And he went to war with the southern Kalingan people. Kalinga was an even older dynasty and region. So he went to war with these guys. And there's this tremendous battle in which more than 100,000, 1 lakh soldiers die. It's carnage. And after the battle, he wins the war. He becomes the master of the Kalingan region. And then he asks himself, what was the point of doing this? Look at the destruction. Look at the devastation. See how many people died. And he had this, what's called Hriday Parivartan. And he decided to walk the path of non-violence, ahimsa and all that.
Right.
And that's why he became a Buddhist. And then he started preaching Buddham Saranam Gacchami and so on and so forth. And that's how we lived happily forever after. But what is now known is that he had already started practicing the precepts of Buddhism a few years before the Kalinga War.
While he was killing all these people in Kalinga.
Before the Kalingan War. Before he even went to war with Kalinga.
So killer Buddhist.
Yeah. So he was a Buddhist when he decided to attack Kalinga and when he launched his expedition there. So he was already a Buddhist. What's also known is that it is alleged that he had 99 other siblings.
Yeah.
Okay, so kings, they procreate a lot. So maybe his father was very active that way. So he had apparently 99 other half-brothers, step-brothers, whatever it is. And the main crown prince was off to some borderlands, maybe Gandhar, present-day Afghanistan or whatever, for some business. And that's when the father died. And what Ashoka did was he usurped the throne that was reserved for his elder brother or whatever. And not only that, he killed off all of his other half-siblings.
Yeah.
And maybe he even had the crown prince also killed off. And then he became the king. He became the emperor of Bharatvarsh. And he did a lot of religious persecution of all the people who were trying to support his half-brothers and so on. So there was a lot of religious persecution done to some people. And he was already a Buddhist by the time this entire Kalinga business happened.
Right.
And it is also known that he put all these stone inscriptions in various parts of the country. We have stone inscriptions in present-day Pakistan, the northwest frontier province, in Gandhar, Afghanistan, in various other parts of India, Gujrat, and so on. And in all of these stone inscriptions, he preaches non-violence and piety and justice and all of that. But there are a few stone inscriptions in Kalinga in which he does not say any of that. So over there, the message was different. In Kalinga, it was, I'm going to rule over you and you guys need to bear with it. Everywhere else, he preached non-violence and dharma and all that. So it was a PR exercise. It was the greatest PR exercise of ancient India. And the good thing about it is that it tells us how big his empire was. Because he placed all these stones at the borderlands of his empire. So we know how vast his empire was. So that's a good thing that came out of it.
I took a class in college called Cities of the Middle East. This excellent professor, her name was Betty Anderson, and she taught us something that I will never forget in life. It's like how kings would get monuments, inscriptions, poems written about them as a way to preserve their status in history. Because one of the things you had as a king was not only might, but also money in your treasury. And then you could commission history that people would remember 200 years from now in a certain way in your favor, right? So one of the things we see now happening in India with the new government is there's been a lot of revising of history. And it always begs the question, why are there always two narratives? Why is there like a written history, then some people come in and say it's time to revise it? And what is this problem of history that it by default excludes?
The thing about revising history, I believe, is legitimate. Because like I said, our history has been written by our oppressors, by our colonizers. It is the British who came to India and they proceeded to write their version of India's history. And that's what we have been taught for decades. That's what our mainstream Darbari historians have been parroting for decades.
So Darbari historians are who exactly?
Darbari historians are the Romila Thapars, the Irfan Habibs and all the Congress-sponsored historians, the Marxist historians. They have continued that propaganda. That's propaganda, unfortunately. My question is very simple. Since 1947, what new historical discoveries have they made? What new historical research have they done? If you look at Romila Thapar's works, her books, she's just rehashing what English historians have written. She has not come up with any new historical discovery or any new interpretation, right? Neither has Mr. Irfan Habib, neither has anybody else. They're just rehashing the old stuff. Historical research is about trying to discover new things. There is so much archaeology happening. Let me tell you about Dr. B.B. Lal, the world's greatest archaeologist. He is still alive. He is 99 years old. He has written more than 50 books on archaeology. He was the head of the ASI. He was one of the few good archaeologists in the ASI.
Right.
So he has written more than 50 books. He's written more than, I don't know how many research papers. None of this information and new knowledge has been allowed to make it to India's history textbooks. He has been totally marginalized.
Who stopped it?
The mainstream Darbari historians. Who else? The ones who are the gatekeepers.
Right.
I mean, if we are making new archaeological discoveries, should that not become part of the curriculum? Because it offers us a new perspective on the history of our country, of our civilization.
Yeah.
So that's why I tell you that this is necessary. It's not revisionism, it's decontamination. We are decontaminating history. We don't want... See, in the past, history has been skewed very strongly leftwards. Now I'm not recommending that we should skew history rightwards. We need to have a balanced, factual perspective in our history textbooks. That's all I'm saying. Based on actual evidence and data. That's all. This is what we discovered. And this is what it seems to indicate. That's all. Not somebody's opinions. When they say, let's talk about Sati. They say that India was a place where widows were burned. I'm sure everybody believes this. The Bengalis believe that their ancestors used to burn thousands of women
It's shown
alive.
in several films also.
It's shown everywhere. It's all part of the mainstream media. Right. So the Bengalis, for instance, believe that their ancestors used to burn tens of thousands of women alive against their wishes every year. Right. Now, if you look at the actual data, where does it come from? It comes from English missionaries. And the funny thing is that it starts suddenly at a certain point in time. Before that, before the missionaries came into the picture, the East India Company was keeping records. And there was no instance of widow burning anywhere in that. So how come when the missionaries come into the picture, this suddenly becomes a big thing?
Right.
All of a sudden, 10,000 widows per year are being burned alive in Bengal. And Bengal has no tradition of sati. It is not there.
So what about the role of Raja Ram Mohan Roy then?
Yeah,
Because
he was a fraud.
reformer.
He was a fraud.
In what sense?
He was a British stooge.
Really?
Absolutely, 100%. Very controversial statement I'm making.
No.
I've got a lot of hate for this.
Right.
I stand by my words. He was a fraud. He was a British stooge. He was a crypto convert. That's what he was. He was a Unitarian Christian. And he was doing God's work by demonizing Indian culture.
Sorry, Unitarian Christian is, how is it different from a Protestant or a Catholic?
It's one of the sects of Christianity.
Okay.
I'm not very sure about that. I've not really researched it.
Okay.
But that's what it is.
Interesting, because I remember, and this is based on my NCRE textbook as a kid, right? It was born in 97. And it said that Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and they mentioned a bunch of other names, how they would basically use lines from our Vedic texts, because the assumption was that the population is foolish and is more interested in the religious books as opposed to whatever these guys had to say. So in order to appease the population and tell them to stop sati, they would use specific lines from the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas and then interpret them in a revisionist modern fashion to abolish sati. I grew up believing this. I also grew up believing the virtues of Nehru. I grew up believing the virtues of Rabindranath Tagore. I grew up believing the virtues of Mahatma Gandhi. I grew up believing in an India that was all about unity and diversity, all of those things. But the India I live in right now is a different, bleaker picture than the one that my history books gave me. So my question is, like, where do we even start? There is so much work to be done. And what is the end of this? Like, how much will we revise? And, like, what do you think? How do you see this happening?
Well, we need to first address, we can start with the colonial texts. What did they write? Because at the root of everything that we are taught in history today is the British colonial texts.
Right.
What did the East India Company's commissioned writers and their so-called scholars, etc., what did they write about India? Because that formed the basis, the groundwork for whatever was written about India in the future.
Right.
So it is, so I don't remember the names and all that, but yeah, it is these English writers whose works form the bedrock of what is Indian history today. The perceptions, the attitudes and all that about Indian history. So there is this very negative outlook about Indian culture in our history textbooks. Like, Indian culture is backward, it is misogynistic, it is casteist, it is primitive, and idolatry and all that. Even, I mean, when I was a kid, I used to read about idolatry, and it's a very bad thing. Why is it a bad thing? Why is Murti Puja a bad thing? So that sort of thing, So there are these implicit assumptions that certain things are just bad. And they will not tell you why they're bad. So what we need to do, perhaps, I would say, is that start with the biases that have crept in from the English authors, the original English authors, what they wrote. And that is the root cause of everything, right? So
about the idols, that makes sense because, Christianity is an Abrahamic religion. So they have no idols. So
that's their perspective. Fine. We respect it. But why should they not respect our perspective?
None of the Abrahamic religions are polytheistic at all. But we're a country that has, like, Aravind Adiga wrote in his book like 70 years ago, 33 crore gods, something like that.
The thing is, when you see our textbooks, when I remember when I was in school in India, I mean, as a kid, there was this thing about idolatry. Like, idolatry is bad. Like, what was it? Brahma Samaj, Arya Samaj, what was it that preached against idolatry? It is bad.
Arya Samaj is against idolatry. Yeah.
Why is it against idolatry? Why do they need to reform Hinduism? What's the need to reform Hinduism? Is Hinduism something evil, primitive, backward? Why? Why is it so? It's an implicit assumption that they're putting into your head that your culture is backward. It needs reformation. Right? That's what's happening. And we don't think about it. So it's after a lot of thought that you realize that this is what they're trying to teach you. That's what they're trying to brainwash you into believing. That your culture is intrinsically backward, primitive, in need of reformation. So that's what we are being taught throughout our formative years.
So what can we do as say, for example, like as young Indians? Are there any specific texts that we can read? Are there things that we can do to kind of understand our place in the world? Because I do see, I mean, when I lived abroad also, there was a lot of Indian defeatism that I saw in students where there was a sense of imperial supremacy in their heads. And I'll even tell you, one time I was in Vatta Canal, which is right next to Kodai Canal. I was staying in a hostel and two people from Israel or I think the UK came in. मेरे कानों में से खून आ गया था because I heard this one Indian gentleman tell them, I'm so glad you guys invaded us, we deserved it. And so that is what I'm saying. The level of internalized inferiority complex is so much because या तो हमें पता नहीं है कि हमारी हिस्ट्री क्या है, या तो हमें लगता है कि either we aspire to be more English or Western, and technically we're speaking in English, so it is a universe. It's a mixed, complex, multicultural world, but I don't seem to understand this problem of defeatism, where it stems from. I will say, in the last 5-7 years, what has definitely happened is some of this has gone away. As now, with people like you coming out, we are at least redefining what it means to be Indian. We're articulating parts of ourselves that have been lost for ages.
So what is happening is that we have had this millennium of humiliation. The Chinese speak about their century of humiliation. India has had a millennium of humiliation, starting with the Turkic invasions, which caused the destruction of all our universities and all that. So it starts there.
Yeah.
And century after century, we have been beaten back. We've been broken. The Turks destroyed our culture. They destroyed all our temples. They had this imperial system all upon us. Then the Europeans came in. They did the Goa Inquisition. They did various genocides. The English came into the picture. They engineered hundreds of artificial famines, because if you are starving, you can't fight. So they engineered hundreds of artificial famines. At least 100 million Indians died over the centuries in that.
Yeah, there's reports of Winston Churchill allowing the Bengal famine to keep happening.
That's the last one. That's the last one that happened.
Okay.
So over the centuries, from the 1700s onwards, the English engineered hundreds of artificial famines in India. At least 100 million Indians were killed.
How do you do that? Deliberately stopping grain supplies to people?
Just read how Churchill did that. He took the grain that was already present in Bengal, which had been harvested, and he shipped it to Greece. And the Bengalis starved. It's as simple as that. It's all about logistics. How did Hitler engineer the final solution of the Jews and the Romanis? Engineering, logistics.
Goebbels was an excellent speaker.
Logistics. It's all about logistics. So that's how the English did that. They starved Indians to death. They destroyed India's population. They stole our wealth. And because of these centuries of foreign occupation and domination, Indians absorbed this complex that white skin is superior.
Right.
Foreigners are better than us. And then what the English did was even more insidious. They destroyed the Indian indigenous education system, which was in Sanskrit, which was all across India.
The apprentice style form of education, right?
So the education system in India was based in temples. Temples were not just places of worship. That was your local school. So every town, every city, every village, every neighborhood had a temple. And this is where you went to get your basic education.
Right.
So you would be taught your basic Vyakran, grammar, your mathematics, and whatever else. If you wanted further education, you could go to a larger temple, or you could go to a Mahavihara, or you could go to a great university. So that's how you progressed in life. So India's education system was based in the temples, and it was Sanskrit based. Boys and girls both got education. It is recorded in the Beautiful Tree by Dharampal. And
Beautiful Tree by?
Dharampal.
Okay.
So Dharampal was a writer about 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. He collected all the statistics the British had collected before they destroyed India's education system. And he compiled the statistics, and he brought out this picture of what kind of education system India had before the British destroyed it. So it is known from his statistics that boys as well as girls got the same education, and each of the so-called four castes, everybody got the education. Everybody was given education. It was free. It was state subsidized. In India, education was free. So that's how it was. It was universal education. Everybody got it. Whatever was your status in society, whatever was your gender, everybody got the education. So that's what we had. We had the world's greatest education system. The British destroyed it, and they imposed their colonial education system, their English language education system. They wanted to create a class of brown coolies.
Right.
The education system that we still follow is the same as the British education system, the colonial 19th century education system.
Yeah.
It's designed to create clerks and peons, not leaders.
It's from the industrial age.
It's from the colonial age.
Right.
It
I
was
mean, in the
not,
sense, it was made for factory workers, right? To have standardized factory workers.
the system they had in England was for creating those drones, factory drones.
Right.
The system they had in India was a modification of that. It was designed to create slaves, clerks and peons at best. That's what it was. Absolute obedience. You may not question your teacher. You cannot ask questions. Repeat what they say. That's all. You want to stand up? Teacher, may I stand up? You want to sit down? Teacher, may I sit down?
Yeah.
You want to come inside? Teacher, may I come in? You want to go pee? Teacher, may I go pee?
Yeah,
That's how it is.
it's very weird. I before this moment, I didn't think about it. One of the best adjectives you could use for a kid in school was he's a very obedient boy.
Absolutely. The best thing you could say, the best thing a teacher would say about the kid is he's very obedient. He's an obedient kid. Why should you be obedient? Rebel. Come on.
Yeah, it was said for me. I was also said ki ye chatterbox hai, but then I grew up. I was like, something is wrong here, right? It just means that you're absolutely like and mischief and pranks are bad.
Bad.
Really
Terrible.
bad, you know, because for some reason that represents the exploratory urge that human beings have, and you want to kill that. Yeah.
Any manifestation of curiosity, of intelligence, of individualism is anathema.
Yeah.
It is verboten.
So do you think like our one of the problems that we also have as a country is we are still a collective where it is still easier to say this person is X person's son and comes from X person's family as opposed to saying this is an individual that stands alone, right? Because we're from a collective culture. Do you think we can arrive at something like the West has where each person is valued for who they are?
I think in the past, each person was valued for who they were. They also had a very strong connection with their ancestors and their family. So India is a land where you had these extended families, right? That is the Jati system. You belong to a clan, not just a family, not just a nuclear family, not just an extended family, but a clan.
Right.
Who are your extended relatives? So you were proud of that. And that was a support system. Nobody was ever alone. Today in the West, you have this individualism, which comes from the Anglo-Saxon world, which is a very different form of Western culture. You won't see that in Germany or France. You will see it in the English-speaking world. This extreme individualism. See how they treat their elders in the English-speaking world. See how they treat old guys.
With disrespect.
Extreme disrespect. You will not see that in France or Germany, in Switzerland, in Italy or anywhere else in continental Europe.
Italy has a very familial culture.
It is.
Yeah.
Greece, Italy, similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you won't see that in England or in the English-speaking world. Very different culture.
You grew up for some parts in Switzerland, right?
Yeah, I did.
And there's a lot of Indians right now who, whenever they can't find better role models, they're like, look at the Scandinavian countries, look at how they're doing stuff, right? Growing up in Switzerland, and I know that they have this decentralized way of governing. Are there any particular things that strike out to you from your childhood that inspired you about how the country is run, that make you feel like I wish this part was implemented in my own country?
Well, it's a very beautiful place. I wish we had cooler weather in Mumbai. Apart from that, I don't see anything really superior about their society. They have a decentralized system. They have these cantons instead of states and all that. They have these commune systems. And they have a reasonably good education system in which you have exams every week or so instead of a final exam in which you have to prepare for it like it's a very high stakes thing.
Yeah.
So you are evaluated, your performance is evaluated throughout the year and so on. Apart from that, it's a very rigid society. Very
How so?
hierarchical society. I mean, you don't break the rules, you get shot. They have a very strong police force there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you don't break the rules there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how it works. So I don't see anything special about Switzerland apart from the fact that it's a very pretty place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, when I was a kid there, I used to really like the place. It's so nice, good weather, nice.
Yeah. So how did you end up here? Was your father some kind of an expatriate?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he used to do research there.
Oh, interesting.
He's a scientist.
So you grew up around universities then, probably?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So libraries were not intimidating to you at all?
Not at all. It was my like my second home.
Are there any particular books that strike out to you that you read as a kid that you still remember? That because I remember when I first went to a big library. This was in Boston University. I was surprised to read some of the books. You could not find them on JSTOR or WorldCat. They were pretty archaic books, and you really had to sit and read them in the library to get a sense. Did you ever have that feeling where you were like, I can't read all the books in the world? Because a lot of people who turn out to be extremely articulate later on in adulthood usually have like an intense reading habit earlier on. So any particular books that strike out to you from those times?
So it's not a particular book as such, but an entire genre of books. So I used to consume science fiction voraciously when I was a kid, like when I was 10, 12, 13, teenager.
Yeah.
And in this library that I had access to, I discovered this cache of old science fiction books from the 1950s. It was called Science Fiction Book Club, and they used to come out with a book every week or every month or something. So there was this whole cache of old science fiction books. And what I saw was there was this very hopeful, optimistic science fiction about the future of humanity.
Right now it's primarily dystopian.
It's all dystopian now. That's the thing that you see today. All science fiction is dystopian. It's all pessimistic, dark, gloomy. In the 1950s and 60s, it was very optimistic. It was great fun to read. So that's the transformation I've witnessed over the decades. That science fiction has become terribly dystopian, gloomy, depressing.
It's become Russian.
Well, worse than Russian. It's become
it's become Russian because Russian propensities is more toward being a little cynical about things.
Russia has that thing. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Because did you read Aldous Huxley at all at some point?
Not yet.
Yeah. So Aldous Huxley has something very interesting. He has this book called The Island, and he has the other book, I think it's called Brave New World. Brave New World, right?
Yeah.
Brave New World is the dystopia that will befall the UK, but The Island is a very fantastic book that I think you like. It's about this fictional island called Pala, which is next to India, right? It's melded Eastern wisdom, Eastern philosophy with Western science. People from all across the world live there. It's a protected capital. No one can come in and come out. Their initiation rituals include giving kids mushrooms and having them worship the Lord Shiva, and then do rock climbing to understand life and death. The whole society operates on different things. It's got Ayurvedic doctors, it's got Western doctors, and it's an amalgamation. It's very interesting to see someone sitting in the 50s and 60s envisioning a future where two contrasting opposites came to meet. Now, the science fiction that you were reading, were this taking place on other planets? Was this around our own Earth? Because I haven't read as much science fiction as I've watched shows like Black Mirror, or I've seen movies like Fantastic Planet.
So the science fiction I read was all over the place. Some of it was in other planets. Some of it was in the future on our own planet. Some of it was even in the past, and so things like that, or in an alternative reality.
Interesting.
So I've read all kinds of science fiction, and it's very. I think it's my favorite genre even today.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
Do you know Sabu is from Jupiter?
No, I haven't read that part. What is it? Tinkle?
Oh yeah, no, it's Chacha Chaudhary.
Chacha Chaudhary. Okay.
They say Sabu is from Jupiter because like Jupiter is the biggest planet, and Sabu is also big. Yeah.
Okay, that way.
Yeah. As far as your online career is concerned, you broadcast pretty much every single day now, right?
No, I do it twice a week, I think.
Twice a week, yeah. What is your plan with this? Are you going to take it to the limit? Are you going to do you have a mental metric in mind? Like I'm going to get to 1 million subs because that's what younger people do. Or do you want to make this like a larger enterprise?
I haven't really given it that much thought. I'm just taking it like it comes.
You do this full time?
Not really full time.
Okay.
I'm doing it twice a week, two live streams a week.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing.
So what does your day look like other than that when you're not doing that?
I have my research to do. I have my reading to do. I have certain things that I'm creating, certain projects that I'm working on that I will not disclose right now.
Okay.
And also I have the YouTube thing. So it's a pretty hectic day. I'm traveling a lot also these days.
Are you an independent researcher, or do you work with governments or like think
I
tanks?
am currently totally independent. I'm not affiliated anywhere.
Okay. As far as scientific research in India is concerned, are there any problems that strike out to you?
The problems are the institutions. The research is supposed to happen in universities. That's how it works everywhere in the world.
Yes.
In Indian universities, there is no emphasis, no focus on research whatsoever.
None at all.
Research is incidental if it ever happens. And there's no... let me give the example of IITs. IITs are supposed to be the best institutes in the country. You go to an IIT, you will find that the washroom is $1 million washroom. There's so much equipment and stuff. It's like a luxury 5-star washroom. You go to the auditorium, it's $1 million auditorium. You go to the lab, the equipment is 20 to 30 years old. It's obsolete.
Same with our school chemistry labs, by the way.
So that's how it goes. They have the funding, but the wise people who run the institutions, they have decided to allocate the money in the wrong places. Let me give you a different example. We have this organization called DRDO, is it? DRDO. So DRDO has more or less roughly the same budget as DARPA. You know DARPA, right? DARPA, Defense Advanced.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's the foremost research military research organization in the US. They were both founded in the same year. I think it was 1958, give or take. And the budget is more or less similar. Now, the budget is more than $1 billion, I think. Okay. Now, DARPA has a staff of 150 individuals. DRDO has a staff of more than 20,000. Out of that, only 5,000 are scientists.
The rest is just...
God knows who they are. I think the DRDO staff, the manpower is about 30,000 or so.
That's crazy.
Out of which only 5,000 are scientists. So that's where all the money is being wasted. They call it scientific budget, but all the money is being wasted on salaries of God knows who. You have 5,000 scientists and 25,000 non-scientists. Why are we employing those people in DRDO who are not contributing anything to science or research? So that's the problem with our bureaucratic setup. That's the problem.
Is it difficult for you as an independent researcher to get grants?
I don't get grants. I do everything on my own. I'm funding myself.
Is it challenging? Do you think that if you could have institutional funding, you could do research at a scale that would do justice to your skill? Well,
not in my case. I'm a theoretical physicist. The only equipment I need is a pen and a paper and my brain. That's all I need, nothing else. So for me, in my case, it doesn't work that way.
But say you take that to, for example, evolutionary biologists or someone else, people who study genomes or even chemists for that matter. You think they would benefit from grants?
Most certainly. You could buy more equipment, you could build a better lab, more facilities, all the chemicals that you need, all the equipment you need to do the genome sequencing, better equipment. You could even devise your own equipment if you have the funding for that. So in that case, it really helps.
My college is a private research university. When I went there, one of my friends worked in a 3D printing lab there, and they almost printed a 3D gun. But my point is, they were just 19, 20-year-olds. I mean, I would drink with them in the night, and then the day they're doing research. It was mandatory for all. It was free for all. You could just go and do it. Foreign universities, American universities, pour in a lot of money. Some of the best research in eye health come from Stanford. Thanks to Dr. Huberman, Dr. Andrew Huberman, who has the Huberman Lab podcast, right?
Yes.
I've always wondered what could happen if in our country we started pouring money and started studying the Indian genome, or started studying how maybe how the Indian gut microbiome works. Instead, we have a lot of conjecture. Instead, we have a lot of quacks because of this problem. Is our government not interested in science, or is it interested in posturing? Like, how long has this problem existed? I'm sure kabhi na kabhi to aisa hoga na. There must be a golden age of Indian research, say when India was becoming an atomic power.
I think the golden age of Indian research was more than 1,000 years ago. There's been nothing really happening since independence.
Yeah.
All of our organizations, all of our universities, institutions are deeply, highly bureaucratized. We have good scientists. Look at ISRO. what they are able to do on a shoestring budget.
Correct.
Look at our atomic power program. We have good reactors. We have nuclear weapons. I mean, we have scientists who can do that. We have the talent. The problem is that in the education system, first of all, we don't have enough seats. And the education system, unfortunately, does not reward talent. It identifies and destroys talent. It rewards mediocrity. So what happens is that talented students go abroad and they spend millions of dollars collectively, billions of dollars collectively, getting an education abroad where they are taught by Indian professors.
Right.
So that's the system that we have in India today. There is no focus on research. If you look at the various departments, it's all mediocrity. If you want an advancement in your career, if you want a promotion, it all what matters is how good you're at playing politics, not at actually performing. And it's all about seniority. If you look at the development of quantum mechanics in the 1920s, 30s, etc., all of these guys, Niels Bohr, etc., they all became full professors before the age of 30. Most of them.
That's crazy.
Based on their achievements, based on the work they did, not based on how old they were or what the seniority was.
Right.
And they were given everything they needed to do the research. And that's why this bunch of young guys were able to come up with this new science, quantum mechanics. Imagine we do the same thing in India. Imagine the kind of brilliance we have in this country. We are the most brilliant people in the world.
Right.
We came up with mathematics, calculus, trigonometry, everything. We discovered all these things.
Was that the Pythagoreans?
The Pythagoreans, what's that?
No, it was not the Pythagoreans.
It wasn't the Greeks that came up with this. It was India. All of it. Algebra, calculus, trigonometry, infinite series, astronomy, pharmacology, toxicology. All of it has come out of India. We don't know this. We are not taught this. The oldest record of a supernova explosion is from about 6,000 years before today.
What is a supernova?
It's the death of a star. It's the explosion of a star. So the oldest known record of a supernova explosion is from an inscription in Kashmir, which dates back to about 6,000 years before today.
That's crazy.
So that's in India. So that's like we were doing astronomical observations and recording them 6,000 years before today. And when the Greeks came to India, during the Mauryan era, which is about 300 or so BC, they said that the Indians have a calendar which dates back to about 6,600 BC. And their reckoning of time begins there. And they have an entire sequence of lineages and dynasties starting from 6,600 BC or so, thereabouts.
Right. I just read an article, the place I'm from, Faridabad, they found what is arguably, I think the oldest cave paintings they ever found were in France, but they found like the second oldest, something like that, in Faridabad, where there are proper carvings and stuff. I'll send it to you. I was very surprised because that area is full of mines and it's the Aravalli Hills. I had no idea, because I know the Aravalli Hills are one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world, but I had no idea that, something like this could emerge from that area. A couple of things. As far as the ethnic diversity of India is concerned, right? Because of a musician friend, I came to know about the Siddi community. Is there anything you know about them? What makes them special? They ethnically they look African, but they speak Gujarati.
Yes. So what's believed is that these people were of African origin. They are of African origin. Their ancestors were African slaves brought to India by the Turks. So there was this unfortunate chapter in history called it's called the African slave trade.
Okay.
So it was primarily between Africa and the Arabic world. The Arabs used to get manpower from Africa in the form of slaves.
Right.
And use them for whatever work they had, whatever construction work or whatever other activities they had, because they were very powerful, they were very rich. Right. The Arabs, so they were in a position to purchase lots of slaves from Africa. And after the Turks took over India, the same slave manpower, some of it was also brought into India. And some of them managed to survive, and their descendants are the so-called Siddis, who live currently in Gujrat. I think some of them may also live in southern India, perhaps. I'm not very sure. But there certainly is a population of Siddis in Gujarat. I think in Saurashtra, if I'm not mistaken. Somewhere in Saurashtra. Near the Gir forest, possibly, perhaps. So they are ethnically African. They have dark skin and all. But obviously they speak Gujarati and all.
Yeah.
So that's the origin story.
How do you know things on command?
I am curious. I read a lot. If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know it. If I do, I'll tell you.
No, it's always interesting. Whenever I see you reading a question on YouTube, you'll read it and then you almost instantly have an answer. And it's I mean, it's downright endearing. It's great to see that. But what are some things that you're more interested in learning now that you know nothing about?
What is it that I know nothing about? I'm not quite sure.
You know a little bit about a lot of things.
Yeah, you could say I'm kind of a generalist in most things, and I'm a specialist in a few things.
Okay, which is, your theoretical physics?
Mathematics and physics, what I'm a specialist at, yes.
Yeah. What's the deal with Vedic maths? I haven't read it, but I've heard it's quite the rage. People often bring it up as a way to laud India's achievements. Is there any I know there's pure math, there's applied math, there's the math we study in school. What is Vedic math?
So, in our own education system, the indigenous education system, we had these algorithms for doing multiplications, divisions, subtractions, fractions that were substantially faster than the algorithms we taught.
Are they like mental shortcuts?
Mental shortcuts, even something you could write down on the whiteboard or blackboard or with pen and paper.
Okay.
So if you do long division, there's a certain process that you use, right?
Right.
So the process that you use in what's known as Vedic math is much simpler and much faster. It gives you the result with fewer steps.
Interesting.
That's how it is. That's what I can tell you in very brief. You have all these books about Vedic math and all that, which deal with this shortcut. So there are there's a multiplicity of methods of doing various things.
Right.
For instance, there are 2-3 ways of doing multiplication. Similarly, 2-3 ways of doing long division and so on and so forth. That's how it is. I
have started reading this book called Graph Theory by Richard Trudeau. And as someone who's mathematically traumatized, that his book is hope. And that's how he starts the book off with, that if you're mathematically traumatized, this book is for you. That book has no sums to solve. It has no problems to solve. Instead, it shows you how graphs work. And since it's all written down and it's just figures that you read, for the first time in my life, I felt like it is math that isn't based on application. The sort of math we learn in school is like X goes to Y, tell me the distance between the two of them, something like that, right?
They make it very difficult to understand or visualize.
Yeah. So not a lot of us get lucky, and as a result, we remain mathematically traumatized for life. Considering that mathematics is one of your favorite subjects, what is someone like me can do to sort of get back into it?
You want to learn math well? Anybody can do it. Mathematics is just logic. What you have to do is you have to go back to the fundamentals. Start with 2 + 2 = 4. Master that. Then do subtraction. Then do multiplication.
Really go back to the fundamentals.
Go back to the very fundamentals. It'll be a very fast process. In a week's time, you'll be at a much higher level.
So, and do I solve problems? Is that what I do?
The best way to learn math is to solve problems. That's what I have found from personal experience. That's how it works for me. I'm not sure it works that way for everybody.
Right.
But in my experience, the best way to learn anything is to get your hands dirty and get deep into it. Solve
Sounds
problems.
Good. It's just like writing, huh? Are there any contemporary Indian thinkers that you admire?
That's a very difficult question. I need to think about it.
Like someone who's a contemporary whose work you admire. Let's say, say any contemporary foreign thinkers that you admire.
Can't quite think of any right now. See, there you go. You stumped me finally. That's something I cannot answer right away on the spot.
I was not trying to do that deliberately at all. I was just genuinely curious. You have a lot of people responding to your YouTube content, like a lot, right? And I see this hunger in a lot of Indians, especially around geopolitics, revising history, our lineages, our religion. Maybe the hunger was always there, but I don't know, something about internet educators like yourself has enabled a lot of people's latent desires to come out, right? Do you ever feel like the responsibility of doing this is too huge? Maybe I need to hold myself to a different standard. Something like that happens, especially when, you're bound to say something incorrect.
That's the risk you always run anywhere in life. The thing is this, see, what we are seeing now is that social media, for good or for bad, for better or for worse, has for the first time in 1,000 years given a voice to the people of India. It's brought people together. So it looks like it's made India a more divided place. It's not so. It's just exposed the fissures that were already present in India. And what we are seeing is that finally young kids are able to get multiple sources of information. They're able to get their questions answered from multiple places. Until now, all we had was our teachers who would just recite their textbook text, and that's all we had to memorize. But today we can actually ask questions and people will answer them for you. So that's why it's brought out this hunger among people. And you can see they are so curious. They have thousands of questions. I get thousands of questions a week and I can only answer a few every week.
Yeah.
So that's what I see. So there is this latent hunger which was always there, I believe.
Yeah.
But it's now expressing itself.
Yeah, it's when you were saying teachers could just recite, I couldn't help but remember the word dictate. It's all these things from school are coming up now that you mention it. There were proper modules in our class here. Now we're going to do dictation. Wow. So what it was is you were tested on your ability to listen and write what was said to you. This was a memory challenge of some sort, right?
That's it.
And I think our problem is a lot of our education in school was dictated to us, as opposed to autodidaction, which is where is autodidact the person who learns everything on their own? Yes. So we've come from a culture of dictation and talking at people to self-education, and which is why I think it suddenly is no longer important to be in a university and do a 4-year degree. Not that I'm against colleges. I think colleges have their merit. But if you can pick and choose knowledge from the internet, from credible sources, I think you can have a better understanding of what your world is. Because a lot of the stuff in the universities is pretty archaic. It isn't updated as much. Are there things that even you, as an internet educator, if I may call you that, have found from your audiences that you did not know before?
Well, some questions, they take me down certain rabbit holes that bring out new information. And some questions, that they ask me, I have no idea about. So I have to go and research that. So I have myself gone down different paths that I had not gone down before because of the question that I'm asked. So yeah, that does happen, yes.
Some of the things you mentioned on your blog, you mentioned a lot of sources, right? I've done academic essays, so I understand MLA citation format kya hota hai, or there's a bunch of ways in which you cite stuff. The problem when you start to make claims online, logical claims, is people come at it from a place of personal bias. Usually in India, they come at it from a place of, I think this is right. They come at it from a place of using one uncredible source. So for someone whose background is in theoretical physics, who's read and researched research papers, what is like a general advice for someone who wants to make a strong case for anything? What sources are credible? What sources are not credible? How can someone go about proving something to the rest of the world?
Well, if you want to build a credible case for whatever you're putting forth,
right,
you need to ensure that you are citing multiple sources first of all. So if you are saying that X is true, show me a number of sources that point in that direction, first of all. Now, secondly, don't give us sources that are from blogs or from tweets, or from YouTube videos. These have to be published sources, or maybe some authentic records. Let's say it's a historical thing, and then give me the actual inscription. So that is a credible source that's set in stone. So that sort of thing. You have to be judicious in citing your sources, because if you, it's a difference between a fact and an opinion.
Right.
So let's say somebody has come up with a blog post. That is essentially that person's opinion. It's not an actual fact. But if you are citing a rock inscription, that is something that's set in stone. That is something you can...
It's literally set in stone because it's a rock inscription.
It's a fact that cannot be altered.
Right.
And so on and so forth. So if you have a research paper, that is way more credible than someone's opinion. So there is this hierarchy of credibility. You have to go as high as possible.
Right. So the hierarchy of credibility, the highest one would probably be like something like Science Daily, or like a strong scientific publication that you can get on Gist, and then you go down from there.
And
right?
as far as possible, if you have multiple such citations, that makes your case stronger.
WikiHow is probably at the bottom of the list, right?
Wikipedia is the most unreliable source ever.
Yeah, but it's good for like one-line definitions of things, no?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. Are there any questions you have for me?
Not sure. I mean, not really.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, it's very interesting that people ask you questions and you answer them. It's a very I don't know how to explain it. Like why did you decide to use this format as opposed to saying just writing a blog or just doing more podcasts?
Well, writing takes time.
Yeah.
If you want to write, let's say, a 1,500 word article, it's going to take you a while. It's going to take you a couple of hours to draft it. Then you're going to edit it. It's a process. But the same thing you could explain in about, 5 minutes or so. in verbal form.
Yeah.
So it's much faster. You can reach a much wider audience. People don't like to read. Reading is scary.
Yeah.
Reading is painful for most people.
It's very
They don't-
intimidating as well.
It's intimidating, especially if you use academic language or whatever, which I am prone to do when I write.
Yeah.
When I speak, I'm able to speak in layperson's language.
Right.
So that's why this is a much easier medium. It establishes a much better rapport with people.
Yeah.
You are able to reach more people through this, and it just builds a connection.
Do you think you're gonna like launch a course of some kind?
I could think about it for sure. Maybe. Yeah.
I think it'd be helpful. Considering, and this is just a free suggestion because we're doing my podcast right now, so might as well. I think what you have to say to the world is sharp and incisive, cuts through a lot of the chaff that is plagued a lot of our discourse. So I think it'd be interesting because one of the problems, at least I have with say Aryan universities, our universities in India, is a lot of the information is just packed in so much jargon, and you have to do like a long degree to even get a sense of, and if you can condense it into, like, for example, maybe you do like a collaborative course with someone and you explain haplogroups or something like that. I think that'd be pretty cool.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you on the podcast. I will say, I usually don't get as stumped, but today I really had to throng my mind for what to ask you, because you have a way of saying things so sharply that the other person feels like, I wonder what to ask next. So thank you for challenging me as a podcaster. It's always a delight. And where can people find you?
They can find me on YouTube and on Twitter.
Yeah, both Abhijit Chavda.
Yeah, that's
Right.
it.
Okay, sweet. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. Great pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. All right. Oh, can you say subscribe to Dostcast?
Subscribe to Dostcast.
Fantastic. See?